Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why two things that look exactly the same can seem so different in how bright they are? Well, this study might have a clue. Have you ever looked at two gray squares identical in every way, but one seemed way brighter than the other? It's a common visual trick called a brightness illusion, and scientists have been trying to figure it out for ages. Today, we're diving into a fascinating piece of research that suggests our brains are doing some really clever guesswork to make sense of what we see. Think about this. In picture A, you see a gray circle on a black background and another identical gray circle on a white background. Normally, you might expect the one on black to look brighter, right? And it does. But then you look at picture B, called White's effect here. A gray rectangle is inside a white bar. And it looks darker than an identical gray rectangle inside a black bar. This is where things get really weird because the difference in perceived brightness between these two situations is even bigger. It seems counterintuitive. Why would the same gray look so different just because of what's around it? And why is that effect stronger when the background is framed within something else? For a long time, researchers have focused on how our eyes and early brain processing might cause these illusions, but this study proposes something different. It says that our brains aren't just passively receiving light information. Instead, they're actively inferring and interpreting what they see, like a detective trying to solve a mystery. And it boils down to two main ideas. First, our brain might be unconsciously trying to figure out where the light is coming from. It doesn't just think about what is in front of us, but also considers the object itself as a potential light source, or even the space behind the object. It's like our brain is constantly asking, is the light hitting this from directly in front? Is the object itself glowing? Or is the light coming from behind it? Second, and this is a big one, our brain interprets a simple gray shape not just as a flat, non-shiny surface. It considers many other possibilities. It might see it as a transparent object with light shining through it, or as a shadow, or even as a part of the scene that's glowing on its own, or just an empty space. The core idea here is that our brain sees all these possibilities and picks the one it thinks is most likely because it has so many options to choose from. Including weird ones like transparency or self-illumination, it can end up perceiving the exact same physical gray as very different brightness levels depending on which interpretation wins out. It is all about the brain's best guess. To test these ideas, the researchers did a few experiments. The first one focused on how our brain infers light sources. They showed people simple black and white pictures. They showed images like a sunset, mountains with clouds, a climber on a rock, and the moon. The viewers who didn't know what the pictures were supposed to represent were asked to guess where the light source was and to describe what they thought the object was. Here is what's fascinating. Even though they were looking at these pictures in normal sunlight, their brains didn't just assume the sun was the only light source. For the sunset, they thought the light was coming from the bright white circle itself. For the mountains, they thought it was coming from behind. For the climber, from the front. And for the moon, they thought the moon itself was the light source. Even though they knew the moon doesn't actually produce light, this experiment showed that our brains are constantly trying to figure out illumination, even in a flat picture, by considering different locations for light sources, beyond just the obvious. The second experiment dug into the idea of transparency. How does our brain decide if something is see-through or solid? They used a perspective drawing with three gray patches labeled A, B, and C. Again, the subjects were asked to guess what these patches represented and where the light was coming from. And here is the kicker. They interpreted patch as a normal surface lit from the side patch. B, which looks like a darker gray, they saw as a shadow, but patch C, which was physically the same gray as A, they interpreted as a transparent surface with light coming from behind it. Even though it was just a flat drawing, their brains assigned it a different quality transparency, which would naturally affect how we perceive its brightness. This implies our brain doesn't just see a gray patch. It actively assigns properties like transparency, which then influences our perception of brightness. It's all about interpretation. The third experiment looked at a more ambiguous image, a face shape made of black and white. The researchers drew a face. Now, is it a black face on white paper? Is it a white surface with shadows and light on it? Is it see-through? Is it glowing? Our brains can come up with a lot of possibilities. They ask people to look at this face and guess the light source and what the black part was representing. What they found was that people didn't settle on just one interpretation. Some saw it as a face with light from the front, others as a shadow, or even a self-shadow with light from behind. Importantly, they could see multiple possibilities simultaneously or switch between them. This demonstrated that for ambiguous images, our brain actively juggles different interpretations of depth, light, and surface properties. This list shows just how many ways we can read a simple image. Is that black part a face illuminated from the side? Is it a shadow on a white surface? Is it a darker area on a transparent surface? Or is it a self-shadow created by light from behind? Our brain has to pick or at least strongly favor one of these to make sense of it. So, what does all this mean for those tricky brightness illusions like simultaneous contrast and White's effect? The researchers argue that the reason physically identical grays look different is precisely because our brains are applying these complex inferences about light sources and surface properties. Look at figure 6, which tries to explain simultaneous brightness contrast. For a gray circle A on a black background, the brain might interpret it as something that is strongly lit, or even self-luminous, leading to a perception of bright gray. For an identical gray circle B on a white background, the brain might interpret it as being in shadow or on a lighter surface that's also lit from the side, leading to a perception of a less bright gray. So even though the circles are the same, one is perceived as brighter because of the context and the inferred properties. And for White's effect, the idea is similar but amplified. The framing of the white bar around the gray rectangle in picture B leads to interpretations where the gray rectangle might be seen as casting a shadow or being a surface hit by less direct light, making it appear darker. The gray rectangle in the black bar, in contrast, might be interpreted as being directly illuminated or even self-luminous, making it appear brighter. The difference in these interpretations and the range of possibilities our brain considers leads to the stronger illusion. The paper argues that the interpretation of the gray circle on black leads to a perceived brightness greater than or equal to a baseline gray, while the interpretation of the gray circle on white B leads to a perceived brightness less than or equal to that same baseline gray. This creates the illusion that A is brighter. Similarly, for White's effect, the gray rectangle on the black bar X is interpreted in a way that makes it seem brighter than or equal to a baseline gray, while the gray rectangle on the white bar Y is interpreted in a way that makes it seem darker than or equal to that baseline gray. Hence, X is perceived as brighter than Y. The study suggests that in White's effect, the interpretations can be more extreme. For example, the gray rectangle on the black bar might be interpreted as actively luminous, giving it a bright gray perception, while the gray rectangle on the white bar might be interpreted as a shadow, giving it a standard gray perception. This bigger difference in perceived brightness leads to the larger illusion. Now, the researchers are upfront that this is a complex area. They ask important questions themselves. Which interpretations does our brain prefer? Which ones does it toss aside as unlikely? And what are the exact rules our brain follows to make these decisions? This is the frontier of research, but the main takeaway is clear. These brightness illusions aren't just about how much light hits our eyes. They're about how our brains actively interpret the world, making sophisticated guesses about light, surfaces, and even transparency. It's a testament to the complex inferential nature of perception. This work strongly supports what is called the Helmholtzian view of perception, the idea that perception is an active process of inference and deduction, much like science itself. We're not just receiving data, we're constructing reality. So the next time you see those baffling brightness illusions, remember it's not just your eyes playing tricks. It's your incredibly complex brain working overtime to make sense of the visual world by inferring hidden information. It's a reminder that what we perceive is often a construction, a highly probable interpretation of ambiguous sensory input. Pretty neat, right? What do you think? Does this explanation resonate with you? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this dive into visual perception interesting, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more mind-bending science, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. Until then, stay curious.